All right, we're going to talk about the science of reading comprehension today. This is you can get the slides here. Now, I'm not giving away any answers. I'll have the full slides at the end. If you want all of the slides with all of the answers today, I'll have a QR code for that. This one will get you, though, through the slideshow this morning. All right, and I am out of order. I just realized that something is out of order now. I don't know how we did that. All right, well, we're going to go a little bit about, there we go. Your slides should be in order. We've done something to the slides, so we'll be a little out of order. Okay, we good? And I have another one at the end. So if you don't get this one, I have another QR code at the end. All right, so just a little bit about me. I started off long ago in the Department of Defense schools as a paraprofessional for special ed, and I learned from the best of the best. 1 out of 800 teachers are usually selected to be a Department of Defense teacher. So I spent 2 years where I still use some of the techniques. I was working with 3rd through 5th graders, and I still use some of those techniques. It was like doing 2 years of student teaching, which was terrific. I was working on my degree in psychology and a minor in education at the time. I then we moved back to the United States, and we ended up at Fort Bragg. And I worked at a school, Carroll Middle School, where I met Clifton for the first time. And Clifton was this wonderful, talented singer, beautiful individual, like just a sweet person. Clifton could only read his name at that point. He was in 7th grade. And I realized that I was not trained in any way, shape, or form to help Clifton. So I spent the first 6 months figuring out what to do. And this dates me, but the internet was just new at the time, so the resources weren't there. So I was at the parent-teacher store, I was in libraries, I was everywhere I could be to try to find out what should I do. And then I, thank goodness, came across systematic explicit phonics. And I started to make my own materials, find materials at the parent-teacher store, and then help Clifton. By the end of 7th grade, he was probably first grade, maybe first grade and a half level. So we had made some progress, but I just think back to what could have happened if I had known what I was supposed to do walking in that door for Clifton. We then moved to Nashville, and I worked at a school called D.D. Wallace. This was a school for students who had been zero tolerance out of their school zone, but they still needed special ed services. So I had the ODD room, so that is the oppositional defiant disorder room. And it was between that or the ADHD room, which these labels are crazy now, but I was really hoping for the ADHD room. So whenever you're taking a job and you're hoping for the ADHD room, you might want to consider your career path. There I met a number of students, and some of them still needed, so this was at the ODD adolescent room. So the children were 13 to 17 years old. Most of them were boys. And I learned more in the year and a half, 2 years that I was in the classroom there than I think I have in my entire life, because I had to do the behavior, and then on top of that, the reading, and of course it was self-contained, so we taught all of those subjects. And what was interesting is I always give every class, when I first start, I give them interest inventories, because I need to see what do they like to read. They're not reading, so I'm asking about movies, TV shows. And what was really interesting is we have these kids that are in and out of the juvenile system, and they're telling me that they like to watch things like Rugrats, which also dates me. But does everybody know what Rugrats are? Some of the young people might not. Okay, so I'm like, why would these kids be watching Rugrats? Like, that just doesn't make sense. And they would come in and they would tell me these stories like, hey, I just saw this great movie. Miss Elman, you need to go see this movie. And I'm like, okay, what happened in this movie? Well, there was this car crash and the special effects were great and things blew up. Of course, these are movies that they should not be watching at their age. But as I asked more questions, well, who was the main character? What was this guy? Well, what was he trying to do? I don't know. And then I realized that they really probably were watching very simple kinds of cartoons because those kinds of movies were too complicated for them. And I started to think, like, you'd imagine going through life, and narrative is so much a part of our lives, and not being able to do that well, right? I realized that I was not doing a good job. So I could get the systematic explicit phonics now down, but I was not doing a good job teaching comprehension. And I didn't know what to do. So again, there I am stuck going, they're not getting it, and I don't know why. And my go-to strategy was to tell them, just read it again, because I really couldn't see where the issues were. So I ended up going back to school and trying to figure that out. And I've been trying to, two things, crack the nut of reading comprehension. Why do students struggle with it, and what can we do? What is the evidence? And then number two, translating that to teachers so that they can go out and help kids where I struggled at the beginning of my career. So this is the first time I've given this talk, and so I want to make a disclaimer that, because we're going to do fact or fiction, you guys are going to guess whether it's fact or fiction, and I'm going to tell you what the evidence is. But I do want to give you a disclaimer because science is always changing. It is the nature of science that we're always developing and learning more. Most of the things I'm going to say today are based on a meta-analyses. So these are compilations of studies where we have a lot of information, and I'm going to give you that. When it's not, I'll tell you when it's a single study, or if we don't really know in that area. But I do want to give that disclaimer that it's not the end all be all. You have to, it's going to continually change as we learn more. All right. Oh, see, this is where my slides are out. You guys got the answer first. They're out of order. All right. I'll say it anyway. Fact or fiction? Fewer intervention studies have been conducted in reading comprehension compared to other areas of literacy. And now that I've already told you the answer, no. We have a ton of information on reading comprehension. We have over 100 years of research and 40 years of randomized controlled trials and meta-analyses in this area. So we have a lot of information. We're really trying to get at what works, for whom, under what conditions, and for what outcomes. And I will say that we started off with the what works, and we're still talking about what works, but really where the science has developed is looking at for whom and under what conditions, because it changes based on who's in front of you, right? And what kind of outcome we're talking about. So hopefully we'll have more of those answers, those nuanced answers that I think is still missing in the literature soon. I talked a little bit about the meta-analysis. So how many people know what a meta-analysis is? Oh, good, good, good. Okay, so it's a compilation of studies, right? And it really is able to look across different samples, methodologies, and settings. So we can ask some of those nuanced questions. And I like this graphic because it really gives us a sense of how science begins. Usually that's anecdotal reports, right? You notice things are happening, you're like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if that's a real thing. Then we have systematic observation where we look to see, is that happening the way I think it is? We move to case studies then, and we do in-depth case studies. We then look at outcome studies. Okay, if we give someone this intervention, what happens? And then we start to do something here, these randomized controlled trials. How many people know what a randomized controlled trial is? Okay, most of you have heard that. That means we're going to have two elements in there. We're going to have a comparison group, and we're going to have randomization. And that's going to allow us to make sure the groups are equivalent at the beginning and that whatever outcome we see is actually due to the intervention. And then we get to that spot where I spend a lot of time in the meta-analyses, where it's the compilation, usually of RCTs and quasi-experiments. little bit of information to help you interpret the slides that are coming up. So I call this dancing with effect sizes, and this is from a researcher's point of view. So if you get a small effect, a D or a G is typically the effect size we use, about a 0.2, then you know what, I'm dancing in my office because I can probably get it published. And if it's on a standardized test, that's pretty good. Like, it is likely to be a good thing to do with kids. If I get this moderate effect size of a 0.5 or higher, then I'm dancing in the street, because if it's that large, I need to make sure that people know about that. This is something we should do with kids. And if I get a 0.8, that means that first I tell my doc students, always beware of anything a 0.8 or above, because they're very rare, right? But I definitely need to let people know about this, and I'm dancing on the moon if that happens. So I'd like you guys, hopefully you guys in the back can see, if not you have the slides. I would like you to rate what you think these different interventions have. So this is adapted from Hattie's work, where he looks across meta-analyses, and he meta-analyzes meta-analyses. So I'd like you to tell me whether you think each of these things have a large impact, a moderate impact, or small to no impact. So take about 4 minutes to go through and make your bets. Where do you think those land? Okay, it's looking like everyone has their bets placed. We ready to move to the next slide? Okay. Here we go. What's of interest to you? Student expectations, what they believe about themselves matters. They think they can do it or not matters a great deal. Anything else of interest? Okay, student control over learning. Yeah, that one's always interesting, because that is below, though there probably isn't much difference, but that's even below our whole language programs, right? So if we give students control of learning, it doesn't seem to have. That doesn't mean they shouldn't have some control, right, as we see in the student expectations, but it probably isn't the best way to get increased comprehension or other outcomes. Anything else? So people usually say, well, phonics is that low, because, well, it's low, but it's critical. Like, it's still a must, right? It has to happen. But look at those comprehension pieces. Those are looking pretty good, aren't they? Right? They're definitely in that moderate range. And this is a sneak peek, so we've just analyzed some data. We have redone the National Reading Panel. How many people are familiar with the National Reading Panel? Great, yes. So we have redone the reading comprehension piece. This actually project, I've done it as a side project. It's been 10 years to collect all of the studies. And we code about 120 variables on each study. We have gathered, so we went through 8,000 studies to find 220 final studies that met the criteria of being a quasi-experiment or a true randomized control trial. We find an overall effect for comprehension to be about a 0.5. Where am I dancing? I'm in the street. People need to know, right? It's interesting to look at this by decade, and we've just started the sub-analyses. And you can see here, 1970, we have this large effect. And then 2020, like 2010, we're seeing less of an effect. Does anybody imagine why? I'm still working this out. So anybody have any ideas why that might be? Oh, they could be. It could be that there's less attention in the classroom, definitely, on academics. I had not considered, but there's only a few studies here in 2020. So it's probably too early for this, but that's a good point. When we collect more data further, that's something I'm going to have to consider.
The results of language? Not being able to read words.
Interesting. Maybe, but my effects are going down in comprehension outcomes. But we've increased that over time, so maybe. But what I'm thinking is our control groups that actually we're doing more comprehension in classrooms. So when you're comparing a treatment to a control, that those control classrooms are actually like the business as usual is getting better. That's my interpretation of this. I don't know if that's true, and I'll keep you up to date. We'll hopefully have this up for publication in the next couple of months. Also, grade level. So for kids, young kids, you get a larger effect than you do for the older kids. That's not much of a difference, and that is typically what you see because younger kids have more room to grow. All right, another fact or fiction. Experimental studies that use a comparison, I think I've given this one away too, that use a comparison group are the best research designs for determining what works in reading comprehension. Fact or fiction? That is a fact, right? So I'd like you to look at this data here. Students start off at a 25. This is looking at the impact of strategy instructions. We're doing some kind of multi-component strategy instruction. We're working with science text, and we're seeing does that impact their outcomes for comprehending science text. Pre-test is 25, post-test is 70. Was this an effective intervention? Okay, most of us would say yes, but let's say we got the control group data. And we have seen this in like real life. This happens, right? So now my control group actually went from 25 to 70. And my other group, 25 to 75, or which one is I'm missing one of those. Let's see, 70. My control group did 5 points higher. How could that be? Was it the intervention that caused the effect then? Only the light green group, or the dark green group got the intervention. What could have caused these effects? Okay, it could have been the same teacher. They got used to the teacher over time, okay, and they like that teacher. Maybe that teacher's giving the test, right? And they really get to know her and like her. Absolutely. What else? When the test was, that's right. So we could have, they took the test, they really understood, they know what's on the test. So now they just from the test, taking it the second time, they got better. What else? There's one other thing. How about just regular development, right? So over time, kids get better at things. So if this was at the beginning of the year and the post-test is at the end of the year, they're just better at dealing with this text. But it wasn't the intervention that caused the effect. And that's why we need those randomized controllers. That's why we need a comparison group to know that we can really isolate that it was the intervention that caused that effect. So if you see pre-post studies, we can't take those and say that it works at that point. It's helpful for us in a line of inquiry. We have to do that work before we usually move to an RCT. But really, we need the comparison group to be able to say that it's the intervention causing the effect. Oh, there are the answers. All right, so we're talking about, and this is only the case when we're talking about what works. Because I have also heard that people are like, oh, only high quality research is only RCTs. So I've been hearing a lot about that lately. That is not true. Okay, so high quality research is based on what are your research questions and what methodology do you use to answer those research questions? Because oftentimes we can't run an RCT. We can't give students poor comprehension. If we're interested in the differences between kids who have poor comprehension and kids who don't, we can't make people we can't randomize that, right? So there are designs that are answering different questions. However, when we are answering the question, what works, that is where we need that comparison group and randomization if we can get it. Descriptive studies, correlational studies are really important, especially at the beginning line of an inquiry. Like we're looking across time to see if there are differences. And we start off really small trying to understand that. And then we develop into, we have to see, is there even something there to go to an RCT? But always keep in mind that correlation does not equal causation. Do I have anybody from Kentucky? Okay, good. My family's from Kentucky, my father's family, so I can say that this is the number of people who drowned after falling out of a fishing boat correlated with the marriage rate in Kentucky. So we can see both things are going down, and it is correlated at 95%. Like that's a 0.95 correlation is like this is the same thing, but correlation does not equal causation. And so when we're interpreting those studies that use correlation, we have to really be careful of that. All right, another one, fact or fiction. Research indicates that there is one major cause of reading comprehension difficulties. It's definitely fiction. We know that reading comprehension is this complex cognitive task. It's the process of simultaneously extracting and constructing meaning through the interaction and involvement with written language. So tell me, other than decoding and word recognition, what are some of the reasons that kids struggle with reading comprehension?
They don't have the context.
Okay. Background knowledge is huge. What else? Vocabulary, big one. Anything else?
Metacognition, they're not thinking about what they're reading.
Absolutely. How about language? Syntax, morphology, semantics, reasoning, inference, analogical skills. Executive function, like metacognition, self-regulation, attention, working memory. Vocabulary, background knowledge. Print knowledge, understanding text structure and genre. Motivation, print exposure, all of these are, you have to be able to do all of these things to be able to comprehend text. So that it could go wrong in any of these areas. I know we've talked a lot about the simple view, right? It still stands up under a lot of scrutiny. So it's still correct that really word recognition, language comprehension leads to reading comprehension. However, it is definitely more complicated than when we talk about the simple view. So this is the DEAR model. This is Young-Suk Kim's work. And she actually has shown, so this is the graphic of actually looking at all of the data and seeing, does the data actually represent this? And it does seem to represent that we have word reading on one side, listening comprehension on the other side. Without either of these, you got no roof, right? You've got no house at that point. And underneath that, I really like what she's done here, is these foundational skills. So we have domain general cognitive skills that impact both word reading and listening comprehension, like working memory, inhibition, attentional control. On this side, we've got these higher order cognition and regulation and these foundational language skills that we just talked about, right? Inferencing, perspective taking, reasoning, monitoring, reinforcement, vocabulary, grammar. And all of that happening in the context of understanding things about the world, right? Our knowledge. And fluency really requires both of these to happen. Also, so that was really a component model. We're looking at the different components that make up reading comprehension. But here, it's also a process. And this process is complicated because now we have to bring text in it. We have an individual, but we're also bringing text in that, right? There's this interaction between the two. So we've got the surface code. Can they get the words off of the page? And then we've got this text space. Do they get just the literal meaning of what's there on the text? But what we really want is we want kids to go to the situation model. We want them to understand what the author's trying to say. The author cannot give every single explicit statement for someone to understand. They expect the reader's going to come to that reading and they're going to make inferences and fill in the gaps. To do that requires the reader's background knowledge, right? They've got to integrate what's in the text, what they know, and bring those together. And that's done in an iterative process. So again, complicating things. That leads to a lot of complications in assessment, identification, instruction, and I think that's why we haven't moved as much comprehension knowledge into practice because of those complexities. So what do you see? These are two lines. This is 9 and 13-year-olds. This is NAEP data from 71 to 20. What do you notice about those lines? They're not moving much. That's right. We get a little bit of a bump there in 04, but for comprehension, we really don't see. We really have stagnated with our reading achievement. Of course, after COVID, everyone saw this. We took a huge dive there from 220 to 215. But what's interesting, when you break down the data, here are kids at the 10th percentile, here are kids at the 90th percentile. Who has been most affected by this drop? So they've lost 2 points. These guys at the 10th percentile have lost 10. These guys at the 25th, 8 points. So who was most affected? Struggling readers, that's right. All right, fact or fiction? I think you guys already know the answer to this one because you mentioned it earlier. Activating background knowledge is counterproductive. I'm going to call that a fiction. Now, we're going to talk about the caveats of how much to do that. But giving some information to kids is useful. Why is that? New knowledge is dependent on old knowledge, right? And to integrate it, you have to have a place to begin. We do know that well-connected memory stores, so if you imagine this is the way things are connected in your brain, where there are more dots closer together, right? That allows you to activate knowledge much quicker. You can make inferences much quicker when you have that kind of dense knowledge. We know that studies of expertise, how many people are aware of the famous baseball study by Leslie and Recht? Okay, so we know that kids that start off, they look better or have more aptitude. Actually, knowledge is what matters at the end of the day for a lot of these kids. And it's been shown across lots of different fields of expertise. Baseball, heart function, Vietnam War, copiers, they've done this with a lot. If you have more knowledge, then you're going to outdo someone who might be smarter. And in reading comprehension, we know it really matters. So it's an important predictor of your reading comprehension knowledges. Readers who possess more knowledge have better comprehension and knowledge retention. So if they go into, suppose you know something about science, and you're learning, you're reading a chapter. If you knew something to begin with and you can go deeper, you're going to retain more than someone who didn't have that knowledge at the beginning. And even a limited amount of knowledge, just like giving them the title of a story, can impact your comprehension. Now, this is the caveat. We don't know how much time should be spent activating knowledge or building it before you start reading. Because what you want to avoid is you want the kids still learning from the reading. Otherwise, what's the point of reading? If they're not discovering new things, why would they persist in that, right? If you're telling them all the answers before they get there, that's problematic. So we want to reduce that time. We want that to be a short time, but we don't want to totally eliminate it either. Sometimes less is more. I'll show some data from an inference meta-analysis where it looks like engaging in the text definitely allows you to retain more at the end. All right, fact or fiction? Focusing on building background knowledge is more beneficial for students with reading difficulties than teaching reading comprehension strategies. I may get in trouble for this one. Fact or fiction? That one, I would say it's fiction. Only because of what evidence we have so far. So we have strong evidence that for students with reading difficulties, reading comprehension strategies matter a great deal. Okay? I know that there's been a lot of talk about building background knowledge, and I'm totally in that camp. Like, I am studying it, I'm all about it. But we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater, okay? We can't say it's either or. It is likely to be both. There was a study that just came out which is similar to what we're finding in our meta. This was a meta-analysis for students with reading difficulties, and they found higher effects. They mentioned background knowledge, but really there were higher effects for studies that had knowledge development and had an additional instructional component, one of which was strategy instruction. So, and when we look at integrated literacy and content, we see really nice effects. So we get vocabulary effects, 0.9, comprehension of 0.4, content knowledge of 0.89. This is when we integrate the two. I really don't see this as an either or. There have only been a couple of studies that have looked at knowledge versus strategies. Beck and McCowan did one in the 2009. We did one, I think I've done two, and it's just looking like, and this is, that knowledge helps typical readers, and strategy instruction plus knowledge helps kids who are struggling with reading comprehension. And I think that may be because they still need a vehicle for the metacognition, right? It's not the strategies themselves, but it is a vehicle to really make them attend to the text. So I can't say for sure. We're working on that. We are working on a meta-analysis on background knowledge right now, so I'll be able to tell you more later. I also am trying to do more studies comparing these two so that we know under which conditions, for whom and under which conditions these things are best. But I don't want us to throw out years of work because we want to do knowledge now. We should absolutely do knowledge, 100%, but we shouldn't throw out strategy instruction, especially for our struggling readers. This is some of the data that we have found in our new meta-analysis. So preparatory strategies that support background knowledge, we get a 0.43. I'm almost dancing where? In the street, that's right. Organizational, that supports working memory. So if I'm trying to differentiate for kids, what am I getting there? Where am I dancing there? Definitely in the street. Elaborative, so inferencing, using context clues for vocabulary, I'm getting a 0.44, still a good effect. Metacognitive, supporting that monitoring self-regulation, 0.48. Summarizing, this is really main idea, most of it, paragraph shrinking, summarization, we get a 0.49. So we see large effects. Many of these are strategy-based interventions. Okay, but we got to keep in mind, this is the caveat here, strategy instruction is a vehicle. It is not, we don't want kids to learn how to do main idea. We want them to be able to use main idea to get to better comprehension, right? And I think that's where we've gone wrong with strategy instruction, that we've really said, oh, if they can get main idea, they're good to go. No, and we keep drilling it over and over again. Once they have main idea and we can use it as a quick vehicle for them from paragraph to paragraph, great. We don't want to keep teaching it if they've got it, right? We want to move on to things like disciplinary literacy strategies, where we're looking at science or math, and we know the experts look at those, they use different strategies to understand that text. Those are the strategies we need to start teaching. So it's not, I think, that strategies are bad. It's the way that we've done them over time. We've got to be smart about that. It is unclear how many sessions it takes for students to learn a strategy. So in our new meta-analysis, we found that after 20 hours of instruction in these interventions, you don't get much benefit after that. So you get about a 0.63 for up to 20 hours. After 20 hours, it drops to a 0.23. So dosage has been a new area that reading scientists are really studying right now. How much time should we spend at these things? And we don't know that answer yet. It is unclear. All right, fact or fiction. Inferencing skills take a long time to teach. It is a fiction. We did a meta, or I did a meta. This was for students in grades 2 through 9. I actually looked pre-K through 12. The studies were just in grades 2 through 9. And we find on general outcomes, and most of these are standardized, we get a 0.58. Where am I dancing? In the street. For inferential processing, we get a 0.68. That's a great effect, right? Like that's good. What was weird or interesting about this data is that we see for the literal outcomes, we get a 0.28. So we teach inference. Remember, these studies taught inference, but they got something for free. It's very rare in education that we get something for free. So what was happening? And let's look. And then I broke it down between skilled readers and less skilled readers. And I've got, in the inference side, those skilled readers do pretty well, right? But look at what happens with those less skilled. Who needs inferencing instruction? Both of them, but who really needs it? Less skilled readers, right? And then look what happened here. This was the part that like blew my mind because I was like, what is going on here? We taught inference, but the less skilled readers got even better at literal understanding of the text. Why? They did, and they had to go deeper into the information to be able to make those inferences, right? They had to engage with the text. I do think that's why that getting them to engage in the text through inferencing strategies helped them with that literal content. We'd have local inferences, so those reference to pronouns and synonyms, meanings of unknown vocabulary. Global inferences, character, feelings, and motivations, elaborations, themes, cause and effect, author's purpose and intent. All of those are helpful for kids. In this meta-analysis, we found that inference questions, teaching them how to find text clues, activating and using prior knowledge, and engaging with character perspective were very beneficial for students. This is an RCT, randomized controlled trial, that we did with middle school students, and we taught them a bunch of strategies, clarifying vocabulary, finding clues about characters and events, making connections within and outside the text, providing evidence. Why is this important? How do you know that this is important right now? And then practice answering inferential questions. And we found a 0.46 on a standardized measure for this intervention for kids with poor reading comprehension. So it was very effective. And guess what? It only took 10 hours of instruction. So 10 hours, we read 3 books, and they learned strategies and the content knowledge in those books. And we found across the meta-analysis, actually most of the studies were less than 10 hours that got the effects that you just saw earlier. All right, fact or fiction. Vocabulary instruction is especially important for students with reading difficulties. Yeah, you guys know, if you're working with students who have reading difficulties, you know. This is a meta-analysis that we conducted in 2009. On standardized measures, you don't get much of an effect. Okay, so if you teach vocabulary all year long, you're not going to see an effect on the standardized measure, which kind of makes sense, right? Because you're teaching certain words. If they don't show up in the text, why would we expect an effect? But when we break it down into those custom measures, that reading comprehension that did have the words you were teaching, we see a 0.5. So we are dancing where? In the street, that's right. But what again became interesting is when we broke it down between students who have reading difficulties and students who don't. And what we see is with no reading difficulties, 0.39. Still important to do. I'm not quite dancing in the street, but still important for those typically developing kids. Look what happened when we look at the kids with reading difficulties. Okay, it is paramount that you're teaching vocabulary to students with reading difficulties. Like if you're missing that, like they're not going to understand the text. I think I like stall, and this was a talk. I'm going to talk about how to later today. This was a talk where I just wanted to focus on, the big picture of where's the science of reading comprehension, but I still had to just give you a little bit. So this is a framework I like to use. At level 1, you've got that rich language environment. They have to be exposed to rare words, right? That means you're going to use read alouds, encourage them to read. At level 2, this is where it becomes really important for kids with reading difficulties. We need to teach those independent word learning strategies like context clues and morphemic analysis. And then we need direct instruction as well, that key content terms and that general high utility vocabulary. This is the largest effects that we got was the semantic feature analysis. How many people know about semantic feature analysis? Great, they're tough to put together, but once you have them, they are wonderful for activating knowledge and for this relationship between vocabulary and comprehension. This is from Henry and Mudge. This is a first grade example. The kids first go through and they decide, I'm trying to teach miniature, maybe hefty, and we're talking about, all of the kinds of dogs and what. So they would put a plus, a minus, and a question mark. They'd work in groups to do this. Actually, I didn't know that Chihuahuas can have both pointed ears and floppy ears. So you could have question marks in there, right? This is an example from the Book Thief, looking at people that were in the Holocaust in World War II, and then some of the things that happened to them. So we have vocabulary embedded in there, and we have people, we can get a real sense of what kids know and don't know going into reading a text or doing a unit. All right, fact or fiction. Quantitative measures of text complexity are best for selecting text. You should use them, absolutely, but there are a lot of problems with them. Let's look at this one. This is a lower lexile. There we have the same content. So this is from Newsela. If you're not using Newsela, I highly suggest it. It allows you to differentiate very easily. You can work in the same topic, but kids can work at different levels. Okay, you can select which lexile you want them at. It's very useful. So what do you notice about these two texts? What's different about text B? Longer. Sentences are longer. There's also rarer vocabulary in there. I'd like you to take just 2 minutes, and I would like you to order these texts for me from the lowest lexile or lowest text complexity to the highest. You can work with a neighbor. You have 2 minutes to make your selections. All right, place your bets. Here he comes. Okay, so what is surprising? If you're handing out grapes of wrath in 4th grade, you are going to get some phone calls from parents. I guarantee it. All right, so there are others too. Roll of Thunder, usually we teach that a little bit earlier than, 6th through 8th grade. Like typically, we're more about 5th or 6th grade with that one. So why is that? Why do we see, why is Steinbeck in grade level 3 or 4?
It's just word choice.
Okay. Sentence structure. He is known for very short sentences, right? And the vocabulary is not so rare. Now, it's actually interesting because there's very deep ideas in there. So if you're working with kids who have language issues, then this may be a good book for them because they're going to be able to do very complicated things without having to worry about syntax, right? For things like The Book Thief. Okay, this is there's no way that I'm just handing this for independent reading to a 4th grader or a 5th grader unless they're very, very advanced, and even then, I don't know that I would. Marcus Zusak also, if we see science fiction and fantasy, especially science fiction, short sentences is typical, but he uses all sorts of metaphors. He uses all sorts of language in very different ways. So the whole point is that you really, it's great. Text, I use it for all of my work. I level for every intervention, I level all of my text over time. But you've got to know what your kids are reading because it doesn't take into account background knowledge. It doesn't take into account what complex ideas are there. All right, I think this is our last one, or we're close. Fact or fiction, reading motivation interventions can positively impact reading comprehension. It is a fact. The effects are not huge. So McBreen and Savage did a recent meta, and they found that reading achievement, 0.2. Okay, where are we dancing? Are we dancing? We're dancing in the office, right? However, the reason I want to bring this up is you saw the student expectations. This is not disaggregated by reader type. Okay, so for readers who have reading difficulties, this may be more important than what we're seeing for typical kids or across kids. But these interventions you can do with what you're already doing a lot of times. Okay, so you can work on self-regulation. You can work on having choice and autonomy, self-efficacy. Like, these are not things that are going to add a lot of time as long as you structure them. So I'm like, to get that extra 0.2, and when we're thinking about those student expectations over time and having lifelong readers, this could be really impactful. This is data looking at kids who have reported that they like to read on their own time, okay, every day. What do you notice about that data? This is fourth graders. What's happening? It's definitely going down. Okay, your state, Tennessee ranks right here, and I think you guys are ahead of us. No, same. Okay, so we're at the same. We're at the 32nd percentile for fourth graders. Then across the nation, we end up in the 22nd for 8th grade. This is 8th grade data. Tennessee ends up in the 22nd. At least you guys are over here in the 26th percentile. Okay, but this is look how many, like, this is the Department of Defense schools. Only 38% of the kids there. Like, this is a problem, and we're not measuring it, we're not thinking about it, so that's why I bring it up today, because these are things that we can do. We did a study on writing, actually, for kindergartners, and we were looking to see if we could increase their mindset and their writing skills. This was my doc student at the time. So she did like 10 minutes a day where she read stories, a little engine that could. Your brain gets bigger if you try harder things. And we had Ziggy and Nash as little puppets as part of this. Ziggy has a growth mindset, bring it on, I can do it. Zash is like, I like to do easy things, I like to look smart. He quits when things are difficult. And then we have these self-regulation checklists. So I can do it. A mistake, great. Mistakes are great because we can learn from them. So they had this, and then they also had self-regulation for writing as well. And what we found was the kids, look at these effect sizes. Okay, basic writing went up 0.7, conceptual writing for the intervention group, 1.7. We had this writing challenge task where we would give them more difficult tasks, and we'd say, would you like another challenging task? The kids that were in the intervention group ended up, you see that effect size? That's a crazy, we almost didn't get this published because they didn't believe this. Like, it was that bad. And I don't blame them, but the kids in the intervention group took, at the beginning, all kids were taking 3. So if you say, hey, you write your name, and then we give them more difficult tasks. Would you like a more challenging task? Kids stopped after 3, even though on a survey they had said that they were definitely more like Ziggy than Nash. So they were self-reporting that they had this growth mindset. But when you looked at and asked them to keep continuing and persevere, the kids didn't want to move on past 3. The control group stayed at 3. The intervention group took 7.5 difficult tasks at the end of 6 weeks. Okay? So we see a huge difference in just teaching kids about their own learning that they can do it. It was really interesting because the kids were telling me things like, I broke my water bottle last night and I told my mom I was going to fix it. You know, that mom was so mad. That kid was going to fix it. So they really were taking this even beyond their classroom experiences. I do believe this, right? All right, so in summary, we have a robust science of reading comprehension. We just need to get it into everyone's hands, and we need to be using it in the classroom. When we're selecting what to translate, what to use right now in the classroom, we want to look for really good studies that answer the question, what works, with a comparison group. Keeping in mind, reading comprehension stems from multiple issues. You're going to have to do multiple things with the class because there could be different reasons why different kids have difficulties with reading comprehension. We want to focus on building knowledge and teaching strategies. We want to teach those inference strategies and vocabulary. Beware of the quantitative measures. Use them. They're very helpful, but beware of what they can do. And start thinking about that self-regulation and teaching positive mindset for kids. I do like to end each session. I think that a lot of times when you get a lot of information, or at least when I get a lot of information, I need to do something with that. So I really like, because thinking about, well, how can I actually make changes in the classroom? We need to put systems and habits in place to do that well. So I like B.J. Fogg's book. Freddie Hebert talks about this in her book as well, about just making small changes, right? That's how we make true change over time. So when you're thinking about these strategies I've given you, think about one where you can make it easy to do, okay? Just make it simple. When the kids come in, you have an idiom up on the wall, maybe, if you're trying to get language play, and just have something or some kind of vocabulary activity when they come in from recess. Have a cue or prompt that it's immediate, you know you're going to do it because it's right there. And one of the most important things when you can do in habit formation is to celebrate. I mean, people forget this, and they've shown that if you celebrate in some manner, you're more likely to do it the next time, which seems kind of crazy, especially for adults, but it works for adults too. But I think using things like streaks, where kids just put a star or a calendar, you've got a check mark or a star on it. They love streaks, right? So it's going to keep that. It's going to be self-motivating for the entire class because they're keeping track of, we did it every day. So I'd like you to think about what small change do you want to make? When will you do it consistently? What is the cue or prompt you'll use? And then how will you celebrate that? So if you can just do one thing from what we've covered today, that will be terrific. Resources, highly suggest this middle one. I literally have 2 copies and the digital copy. Like if there's someone that does research to practice, this is an old research to practice book that I love too, but someone that does this well is Nancy Hennessy. So if there's a resource, if there was one resource, that would be the one I would highly suggest. Oh, that's right. There's a workbook like in January of like you can just take these things and use them immediately, which is very helpful. Oh, and doing it, tell them.
Patton's going to be doing a book study on that as well. And we've been doing a PLC with Nancy on the blueprint for reading comprehension for years now. So this is, sorry, I'm not sure we'll plug into that.
If there was one thing, research to practice, that you get, that would be it. These are IES, What Works Clearinghouse. The practice guides are gold. If you want to know what works in the classroom, get a hold of the practice guides at What Works Clearinghouse. The site is a little clunky to use, but once you get in there, you will find all sorts of good information that is truly research to practice. Oh, there they are. Sorry. Those are some of my favorites. They have more, but those are some of my favorites. All right. Well, guys, I'm always looking for PhD students, so if any of you want to come to Tennessee, please let me know. Thank you. I do, if they have one. Ooh, I've got it at the end. Thank you for reminding me.